Good evening and welcome to this Valentine's Day edition of the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and tonight we're going to talk about the 4 R's of Valentine's Day: red roses, red wine, ribeye, and rom-coms. Kidding? We're going to talk about nitrogen, and the 4 R's may come up. All right. So, oh goodness, this is going to be a good one. All right, before we get to my guests, I do, of course, want to remind everyone for joining us here on The Agronomists, you can qualify for those CEU credits. Head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists tomorrow morning, and this post will be there. You can sign up for them. You have a limited time actually to claim them, so make sure you do that very quickly. Thank you, of course, for joining us in the comments on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Please ask your questions. Ask often, ask early, and maybe I'll get to all 3 clips. I doubt it. Okay, also, we do have a show sponsor. We have a few, actually. So, big shout out to Real Ag Radio, to Mind Your Farm Business, and to Adama Canada. While other sources of innovation run dry, Adama is here to deliver, leveraging the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative crop protection solutions to your greatest challenges. We're all in on you. Talk to your Adama Canada sales rep today. Oh, righto. It is time to bring in our experts. We are not just talking about nitrogen. We're talking about the most economical rate of nitrogen. And this year, that question, the how much is enough, how much is too much, how much is just throwing good money after bad, is going to be a big one. So to delve deep into all that tonight, I have John Heard, that's Soil Safari John on Twitter, with Manitoba Agriculture. Now, John, are you a soil nutrient specialist? Is that close?
That's why I come to work every day, yeah.
Oh my goodness, look at me go. All right. And Dale Cowan, Agronomy Strategy Manager with AGRIS Co-Op at SCS Agronomy on Twitter. Everybody give them a follow. I'll be honest, Dale, I often forget what your Twitter handle is and have to type it in a few times, and then I search and then I find you. So
Well,
there you go. I keep looking for Dale. And there you go. All right. So thank you, of course, to everyone in the comments. We've got lots of people on already. Thanks to John, of course, for doing the intro. I did hear rumor that Ray DeBanco is here and he got bacon roses today. I did not get bacon roses, if anyone is asking. Okay. I did get pizza, so that's close enough. Okay. All right. John, I'll start with you in near Carmen, Manitoba. How are things out your way? I understand it has not necessarily been a dry winter.
Well, I think we would call snow a blessing this year. Carmen, although we're not used to thinking of this, we were near the epicenter of the drought in Manitoba this year. You know, that Red River Valley we normally talk about being wet and cold. Well, it was dry and hot this year, and we had some, very low yields in this area. So we need a lot of soil recharge. And so we're looking forward, hoping that this snow stays in place and a long, slow melt, and we get a bunch of it stored in the soil.
All right, we'll put the order in now and see how that goes. Now, Dale, where are you based?
well, head office is in Chatham, Ontario, down the southwest. So west of London, if anybody knows where that is, and so that's roughly where we're located. And yeah, we had a highly variable summer, ended up with a wet fall, so we have lots of moisture and we have lots of snow in kind of the central part. Down towards Windsor, we don't have a lot of snow. Usually that doesn't get a lot of snow, but we were cold. We're about minus 18 today, and under a blanket of snow for the most part. And so we're just waiting for spring to happen.
I know. I have noticed the mornings a little brighter. The evenings we get a little more sun. And I will tell you, I've said this before, February is my least favorite month. And so the fact that we're almost halfway through, or we are halfway through, makes me very happy, because March gets us all itching ready to go. So my apologies, John, because I know really that means April for Manitoba. So just pretend like we're talking about April. Yeah.
I've got something I've got to take off the wall and show you.
Oh my goodness. We're 6 minutes in and we've already got presents. I like this a lot. Also, we do have memes, right, right, Producer Jay? We have memes. Oh, what's this? I've seen global warming. It's called spring. There you go. Thank you, Dick Cheney. All righty. Okay. So let's dig in. Let's get to our discussion. Now, of course, we're sort of framing this all up against uh, incredibly high nitrogen prices, incredibly high fertilizer prices in general. We've also got some questions regarding supply of different inputs. Just today, the news came out that Bayer has confirmed that there will be at least some sort of hiccup in glyphosate delivery this year. Might not impact Canada all that badly, but it's definitely out there. But crop prices are also good. So this certainly isn't necessarily a year to shut her down and not feed that crop. I don't know if there ever is. But let's dig in a little. John, maybe I'll start with some of your perspective on this. You did mention, of course, and for anyone who's been watching this show, the West was in a very severe drought last year. And we know that, yes, winter snow helps, but that's not the same as in-season moisture. So how are we squaring up to this spring?
Well, I hate to use a broad brush. Yes, it was dry, particularly dry in some parts of Manitoba, but we had other parts with some, farmers may be a little shy to say this, but we had some very good yielding areas too. And one of the things that is a reflection of the rainfall and yields that we get is our residual soil nitrate levels. And that really is a big help to us this year. If we do an inventory and configure what's there, those people who tended to have been in the most droughty areas, I think, Lyndsey, you saw the Interlake area on the map, was very dry. They have up to 100 pounds of residual nitrogen. And so that's the first thing people need to do is take that into their inventory. And then proceed from there. Once a good job of soil testing is done, then the conversation can start on the rest of the package.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dale, here in Ontario, we don't test for nitrogen in the fall. We test for P, K, pH, all that sort of stuff. So for farmers here in Ontario, what is the plan of attack for planning for nitrogen?
So we have a number of tools that we use, and so one of them is the provincial nitrogen calculator based on years and years and thousands of sites of nitrogen response data. So it's a calculator I look at it as getting you in the ballpark of looking at your yield goal, looking at your soil type, looking at your previous crop rotation. There's some end credits there. And then, of course, look at all your sources of N that are available to you on the farm. If you got manure, you want to take that into account. So it's all about, choosing that production level, that yield goal, looking at the requirements, and then some of the ag retailers, we have our own formulas. We're looking at yield goal and then an organic matter credit that go against that. And of course, we like to, when we can, use as many on-farm trials as we can with our farm customers and do some different rates and look at those. And they're always a good look in the rear view mirror, unfortunately, but we're getting a little bit better. And it's amazing how year over year consistent the nitrogen response is. And then you get a year like 2021, and all of a sudden we had 25 to 40 bushels more corn than expected, and yet we didn't put any more N on last May. So obviously that N supply came from the soil. So it's always that question of, do I have an N demand problem or an N supply problem? And this year we had a big demand, and it would appear that we were able to get nitrogen because we expect a third to half the nitrogen to come from the soil for corn crop. We only fertilize for a third to half of the nitrogen requirement. So obviously there is a soil bank, but it's mostly mineralization that occurs in the spring and summer.
So that leads me though to the next question of like some farmers experienced in 2021, where we did get sort of unexpectedly good yields, let's say on the corn crop, for example. Is it a 1-to-1 sort of on those fields this year? We have to think about that's N that's gone kind of idea because we've pulled that much more out of the bank, or no?
No, I don't. And the way we are, it's our mineralization in the spring. So what you want is good complex crop rotations, lots of organic carbon, high organic matter. You want to encourage those mineralization. You want good drainage, all those things that help mitigate against loss of nitrogen. Our biggest concern is loss of nitrogen in the spring and early season. So looking at protected nitrogen sources and some of those additives to UAN, things like that. And then how you put nitrogen on. all up front versus side dress. So we have a lot of efficiencies we build in. And the big thing for us is what we often forget in the equation is when we look at nitrogen, we're assuming nitrogen is the only variable for yield. Well, you need all the other nutrients to be balanced. And for us, disease management. So if the canopy gets taken down by northern corn leaf blight or heaven forbid tar spot next year, doesn't matter what your nitrogen rate was. You've cut your grain filling period and your kernel weights go down. And for us anymore, I think we're really focused on what builds heavy kernels.
I would say that has been the story from this past year. Now, John, when you hear Dale say something like losses, sort of managing the loss is the biggest issue, would you say that's the same for Manitoba, or is it making sure that that's mineralizing, there's enough moisture to do that?
Well,
to generalize, of course.
We really haven't had enough moisture the last several years to trigger those losses. In fact, we're in the country here where we still apply 35 to 45% of our nitrogen in the fall. Ideally, that's how farmers would choose to put it down. The 4R approach is banded in the soil late in the season when the soils are cold in either as ammonia or urea. And that usually works fairly well, except if we get a lot of rainfall and moist conditions. And we haven't seen that. And we haven't seen that in the spring. If anything, we've maybe had greater losses if we haven't been placing our nitrogen in the soil in advance. Surface applications, when you don't get rainfall, we call that stranding. And so that's what we've kind of been looking at the last couple years. Kind of the gold standard is still placed or banded in the soil at or close to seeding. And that's been hard to beat in most of the studies that have been done. But we can turn on a dime. We can have some of those wet springs also, and then would be wishing we did have some of that protection on there. But with crops like wheat and canola, they need their nitrogen so quickly that we don't always get responses unless we get a lot of rain in May and June.
So Dale, you're nodding. So how important is it to understand when that particular crop has its highest end needs? How does that fit into the plan?
Yeah, well, that's very important. So in the case of corn, the first 35 to 40 days of corn growth, it only takes up 25 pounds of nitrogen. So if you're putting all your nitrogen on a pre-plant, you got almost 40 to 60 days where the crop's not needing that nitrogen. Now it's subject to every environmental loss potential that comes along through leaching or volatilization loss if it's not incorporated. So we are a big side dress area where probably 70% of our nitrogen goes on after the corn's in 5-leaf stage. We have a mixture of some pre-plant, some split, and we've got some of the more progressive farmers doing split applications, some pre-plant, some in the starter, some side dress, and even a few doing the late season, what we call Y drop into corn at, kind of chest high corn, just that last little shot. And some years that pays big dividends, and other years it makes no difference. And it's all to do with rainfall, and that rainfall drives yield potential, and yield potential drives nitrogen demand. So the concept besides splitting and spoon feeding nitrogen is if that last shot of nitrogen, if I haven't got the weather that's building yield potential, I can opt out of that application. I can leave it where it was planned, or I can bump it up because I think I got more yield potential happening out there and more grain fill potential. So there's flexibility when you split up your nitrogen applications rather than put it all on up front, and then you've got no flexibility after
that. So Warren Schneckenberger says we start with an empty tank pretty much all springs, John. So all right, so we are going to get to some questions because John's got a good one here. Also, shout out to Lara because she managed to hop on, and Peter Johnson's here as well, which is fantastic. And so thanks for joining the show. I'm going to, because we're sort of working our way into this discussion, so I'm going to go to a clip. I'm very proud of myself, 15 minutes in. Peter, we are going to talk about delta yield, and we are going to talk about NRAMP strips. Peter is getting ahead of himself. Next time, I'm going to send him the outline, and then he can know. No, I'm just kidding, Peter. There's no outline. Joke's on you. Okay, but let's, Jay, if you can, cue up our discussion on splitting applications for profit. So this is a corn school, I believe. It's about 3.5 minutes. So if anybody needs to grab a drink, please do. But let's take a look at focusing on an application for profit.
So what we wanted to do is see if it paid, if it was more profitable to split your nitrogen and adjust that second N rate based on the growing season weather in our case. So what we did is we took 40 years of weather from the Elora research station, and we said, let's look at the 20% hottest years, the driest years, the 20% of the wettest years, etc. And in these extreme years, we want to know, when does split nitrogen pay? And it turns out that it's in those more extreme years, more hotter, more drier, more wetter, that it actually makes it's much more profitable to split your N and adjust that second N rate.
Talk about, I guess, the profitability here. You talked about 15 to 20% in a dry year, 1 to 16 in a wet year. Why the difference?
So in a dry year, okay, that crop is going to be limited by water. And so adding more N just is not going to increase yield. So you're making more profit by reducing your N rate in a dry year because you have lower input costs and you're not affecting yield. In a wet year, yields are actually higher on average, and so it pays with that split N application, that second N rate, to top it up, to add more than you normally would, to take advantage of that higher yield potential.
Yeah. Talk about the timing. Obviously, that second application you put on obviously at side dress and then later. Yeah. Any advantage to going, as I say, at side dressed or later?
So the latest we've applied nitrogen has been at V13 in Ontario, and that's pretty late. So in Ontario, V13 is about 10 days before silking, but further south, for example, in Indiana, V13 is going to be 20 days before silking. And so when their farmers are applying at V13, I think a V10 is probably a more comparable stage. So I think most agronomists in Ontario would say V10 is probably a good stage to aim at. We wanted to look at V13 just because it's a little bit more later and you have a longer window to capture weather, look at weather information, look at mineralization, and then adjust that second N rate.
Now, Josh, you mentioned that you looked at extremes of weather over a long period of time. How did you find those?
So we took historical weather that was collected at the Elora Research Station, and we divided it up statistically. We said 60% of this data set is going to be considered normal, average growing season. And we're only going to look at the extreme years, which we defined as the 20% wettest, the 20% driest, 20% coolest, 20% warmest. And we looked at those extreme years because we thought, and this was true in the study, that the economic and environmental benefits of splitting N is going to be most apparent, highest in those extreme years, and they were.
Goodness, there are so many great questions that are coming in. Okay, so that clip brings us to, as you said, Dale, looking at, as we come into the season, understanding when corn requires that nitrogen, but looking at, what is the weather doing? Are we setting ourselves up for lots of yields, or maybe the yield potential just isn't there? And so it allows us to then, of course, either feed that yield or not. So walk us through that decision. And actually, we've got Canadian Cowan just asked, with this talk of side dress, do you do a pre-side dress nitrogen test first? So maybe, Dale, I'll start with you. How do you make that call?
Well, so I'll answer the PSNT test first. We have a few farmers that do it. It's not a widespread practice just because of the challenge of the timing of getting it collected, getting it to the lab, getting it turned around, making an interpretation, a decision, and setting the applicator. Not that it's impossible, but we can't do 2 million acres of corn. There just isn't the lab capacity to do that. There just isn't the physical capacity. So we have some farmers that have made that a practice, and more power to them. And but we have to remember that PSNT test was calibrated for situations, basically cash crop, where there's no organic N in the system and no manure being applied. Because the test only reads ammonium N and nitrate. It can't interpret organic N from manure or biosolids, for example. So ironically, the farmers that tend to rely on the most are the ones with manure. They want to know if there's enough nitrogen coming from manure and do I need to top up? And really the test is challenged to properly interpret those organic N sources. So it's a bit of it's a nice piece of information to have, but it takes an awful lot of interpretation under those practices. So more often than not, we've got pretty good yield history on these fields. We got fields categorized as above average, average, and below average. So you kind of start tailoring your yield goals and nitrogen programs to those to those fields. Certainly, I look at the Ontario Nitrogen Calculator. It gives you a nice ballpark of where you want to be on a pre-plant or a side dress, helps you figure out your N rates by soil type and previous crop. So it's all these factors that we put in. Is the previous crop is pretty important. For if it's previous crop soybeans, it's not so much an N credit as it's not a residue penalty, right? So it's not the soybeans fixed nitrogen. Just there isn't enough residue to immobilize the nitrogen you put on the corn. But corn after corn, you're going to get a 30-pound increase in recommendation because you got all that stover that's going to tie up some of that N and a carbon nitrogen ratio that's unfavorable. So it's all these things that you have to think about going forward and put that in the equation. And if you've had red clover from the wheat the year before, then it was a good stand. Then the debate is it 70 pounds, 50 pounds, 30 pounds, or was the catch so variable? I can't even begin to count on it. Right. So it's one of those conversations with a trusted advisor and history and experience. And we got a lot of knowledgeable farmers out there that are able to think this stuff through.
Now, John, a few things. I do want to get to Lara. Lara has a question. You can't talk about N management and determining the right N rate and not talk about protein in wheat, but I'm not going to quite go there yet. First, Warren asked
slide
about
number 8.
Oh yes, there you go. See, we are going to get there. Hang on, Jay. Just hang on.
Here.
Got it right there. And we are going to talk about the pictures behind you as well, because someone wants to know all about those, and I have a guess as to what they are. But we'll get there. But first, let's talk about your N ramp. So an N ramp trial. Warren Schneckenberger wants to know what that is.
I see that Peter put that in the chat here. That the N ramps, that's something that is just a simple infield strip where you have someone like an advisor or someone comes in and you put in small hand-applied strips with 0 to 200 pounds of nitrogen, and then you observe. And you got to do it in an area where the farmers left it blank, and then you observe and see. And visually, you can kind of tell with cereals, canola, that based on the color or by using a green seeker or something, you can kind of tell mid-season what the right rate was. But in my experience, it doesn't tell you in advance. So it's kind of like, and I told you so. So it's a great thing for tour. It's great in extension, and I could get 0 agronomists to actually do it. I was the only one that played with that, but there's good science behind it. It comes from Oklahoma, where they developed the green seekers. They can do this in winter wheat in time to make a decision, but we can't. We can't assess the differences early enough to make a decision.
Okay.
So another idea on my waste heap of bright ideas, but thanks for that, Peter.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, but it does give you, just like, and Dale, you've got some data to share tonight too about an on-farm trial that does look at, N applied actual, eventual yield and working at. So an N ramp, again, it is a look back, but that doesn't mean you don't learn anything from it. It's just, we can't necessarily use it as an indicator of what to do in season. So it's always in the rear view.
Yeah, is that something we want to look at now? Lindsay's looked at my.
Sure. Yeah, we can. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So Jay, we'll go to let's go to Dale's slides here, because we also, Peter wants to know about delta yield, and I do too, because it sounds something that that's really cool that you would hear on the A team or something, but I don't think that's what it is. So we'll get to that.
Well, so it's kind of on this slide here. So when I look at the slide, so on the left-hand side is the N rates the farmer put on. The next column is the accumulated rates of nitrogen. And then the yield increase, let's call that the delta yield. So that's the response to nitrogen. So at 87 pounds N, that's my base rate. So when I went to the next 42 pounds N to get to 129, the change in yield is 32 bushels. That's kind of a delta yield. So what I did is, it's really hard, because when you look at the profitability there in about the 5th column, we made $161 on nitrogen at 129, then we lost $2 at 206. So where in that, between those two ranges, where is the optimum rate of nitrogen? So it's pretty hard to do that on a graph. So I just plotted that response curve in Excel here, and I put a formula on there, which is kind of on the left-hand side. What's intriguing about this is those X's in that formula are the nitrogen rates, and the Y is the yield. So if I was adventurous enough and I put zeros in there, my zero nitrogen rate would suggest that this field would have produced 121 bushels of corn with no nitrogen. Now, not overly confident in extending that curve. I wish I had a smaller rate of nitrogen, but nonetheless, and I've seen this enough over the years. I've got enough trials where farmers have done zero rates, and it is not unusual in Ontario to get 100 to 120 bushels of corn with absolutely no nitrogen. So the genuine response here. So if I look at the yield of 87 pounds in got me 207 bushels. I don't believe that for a minute that 87 pounds of nitrogen got me 207 bushels. There was nitrogen in that field that got us there. When I look at that 0.42 pounds of N per bushel, when it's normally 0.7 to 0.9, that tells me that there's other nitrogen there to get that yield. So it's always nice if we can do a zero N rate or do a 50-pound N rate and extend that curve, because the delta yield concept really tells you about your field. And so you want to grow corn economically, you want your highest yielding field with the lowest delta yield, the one that needs the least amount of nitrogen to get the big yield. Your next choice is high yielding fields with a bigger delta yield. That way you know you're getting paid for nitrogen. And your least desirable field are the average yielding, lower yielding fields that need lots of nitrogen. That's where you're going to be challenged going forward. So that's the concept behind it. But so here's the response plot out. So if you go to the next slide, then I just use that regression formula just to figure out, well, based on incremental N rates and incremental yield, at what point, and I got two prices of nitrogen, 73 cents and $1.20 a pound, just to show you what the current nitrogen price is. And so if you go down that 73-cent column there, this is the return to nitrogen. I get to about just around 180 pounds of N, and I start to run out of a return. So this is suggesting 180 pounds of N was probably the max rate of nitrogen this past year at 73 cents. If it was $1.20, then about 170 pounds of N is where I would have run out. So what's interesting on this graph is the farmer's normal program was 220 pounds of N total. Previous crop is soybeans, so there's no residue penalty there. So Ontario Nitrogen Calculator would calculate estimate about 181 pre-plant or 144 side dress. And if it was corn, to be 27 pounds higher if it was corn on previous crop. Keep that in mind. Okay. Dealer recommendation, which is, to be honest with you, is me. I was 230 bushel yield goal times a factor, like 1.2 pounds N per bushel, minus a soil organic matter credit, roughly 20 pounds of N per percent organic matter. And I came up with roughly the 190. So that's the range. And then, as I just showed you, this chart suggests that 180 is where we need to be. So I look at 180, 190, 181. I got three ways of looking at a nitrogen response, and I'm feeling pretty comfortable last year that was the case. But when you can argue that maybe the farmer over-applied nitrogen, but this is a pretty good farmer. He does this kind of work constantly. And at some point in time, this was his optimum rate of nitrogen one of the other years. So the question becomes, it's kind of a black box thing, is when is this a 220 bushel year and when it's a 180 bushel year? And this is where we need to get at the crux of it. We're not there. We always are debating. And so we're looking at tools like tools that incorporate weather, what's the historic rainfall, planting dates, hybrid characteristics, all that stuff. And so it's still a bit of a black box, but, we can argue that 220 was maybe 30 pounds too high or 20 pounds too high. And I just keep coming back to, if we can be within 20 pounds of N of optimum, I think we're doing pretty good. And if you go back here, like even to be, say a bushel of corn is $7, I could afford to be down at 160 to 170. It really isn't costing me a whole lot more because my incremental N rate gains get really small as I increase my N rates, right?
Okay. So a few things come to me from this. If the farmer's normal N rate was 220, was it a hard sell to say drop 30 pounds?
Well, this is an N rate trial, so we're having those discussions now. So, every farmer, they get to these rates based on experience. And every year I've had farmers say they put on 10 more pounds of N and geez, they get another 4 or 5 bushels of corn. Well, that pays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's for those that do that trial. I think some of the take homes from this is there's no circumstance where I've ever seen where you need more nitrogen in pounds per acre than you get in bushels per acre. In other words, 200 bushel corn would never need 200 pounds of nitrogen. So
Okay.
that's one rule to start right there is do not exceed your yield goal in terms of pounds of N applied. There's just no reason for that. And if I argue with this farmer, 240 bushel corn at 0.9 pounds of N per bushel is roughly 216 pounds of N. So I'd have to say in the farmer's favor, he didn't really go overboard on his nitrogen
No.
because he removed
Mm-hmm.
216 pounds, right? But we get to this economics of what is the economical rate, and that is a little less than that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the challenge going forward, everybody's worried about $1.20 a pound of nitrogen. What does that do? And I can just show you here is what it does, assuming next year is going to be the similar response to this year. And keep in mind, this year we were 20 to 40 bushels more corn than anticipated because we had an extended grain fill period. And obviously, we didn't run out of nitrogen.
Yeah. John, you have something to add here?
I love it. The farmers here have kind of paid their tuition in spending the time to do a test, and now they can make some sound decisions this next year with some real data. And the one thing is, nitrogen supplying power of soil varies based a lot on that history. Well, now this farmer has history on his fields. So
Mm-hmm.
that this nitrogen supplying power may be irrelevant to a neighbor that doesn't have a similar rotation or past fertilization practices. So I think this guy can benefit from paying some tuition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I have other sites that the delta yield, the zero N yield is only 33 bushels. So that field obviously is a very N responsive field. It's heavier clay, but it's also capped in its yield potential, right? All those other factors come in, soil structure, drainage, all those other things that come in and add a abiotic stress on a plant that limits its top end, right? So you got all of these, you're quite right, John, you got all of these variables that, which is why you just can't have a table that's universal for all farmers.
Mm-hmm. Warren and Lara are reminding us that farming is really just math, which makes me a little bit sad because I like to think it's a little bit of art. Okay.
What's a lot
So
of
it
art?
is not. See, thank you, John. It's not just math, you guys. But we do, of course, we do need to know our numbers. We do need to understand how these things work and be able to do at least some of this math. So there is that. Um, and so I do agree. Now, but John, I do want, let's shift gears just a little bit. I do want to actually, I bring up this discussion of protein and wheat because of course, so corn, we know, so corn needs its N a lot later in the season. So we're going to manage our risk potentially with a split application. And we can even push that quite late, which is pretty cool. But Lara, her family farms in Saskatchewan. And I know this past summer, that was a big discussion was, do you fertilize for yield or do you fertilize for protein? Can you do both? How do you do
Well,
this? So what do the
there,
economics
there.
shake out?
Let me grant your wish for you. Will you go to slide? Will you go to this slide here from Indian Head? This one here.
Okay. I think it's
How
number
do I
8,
hold it
Jay. I'm
here?
not sure.
Go
Yeah.
to that one right there.
Look at that. I love that you print them out, John. You're so prepared.
I'm technical smart here. Anyways,
Yeah, there you go.
Lara, I don't know if you follow the work they do at Indian Head. Yeah, that's it. Uh,
There you go.
anyways, this is some of Chris Holzapfel's data, and it's not the yield response curve that we use in our nitrogen rate calculator. It's even better. It's one that's local for them, and that blue line is the yield response. But amazing, that brown line going up pretty well straight, that's the wheat protein line. And so
Yeah.
when I take that response function and use a simple little calculator, I don't know why I'm getting buzz dinging in my ears. Maybe it's Valentine's Day. The
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyways, the response function shows those are the rates of nitrogen, soil plus fertilizer that gave, some pretty good yield response, up to about 58 bushels the acre. But as the price of nitrogen increases, the optimum rate slipped back a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. But like Lara says, folks growing wheat, you got to keep your eye also on protein. And within that slippage there, still good. That red line, I don't know how it got out of place, but that red box is in the wrong place now. Anyways, the optimum rate somewhere between 105 to 125 pounds of N, and we're still over 13.5 protein. That's a pretty good target, but if the penalty is also you start slipping below that, then you may be sacrificing. And as a prairie farmer, you have to remember that we're the last ones to harvest wheat on the continent. So if we can keep our eye on Kansas and Oklahoma, if they short their wheat with nitrogen and produce low protein wheat, there may well be some opportunity for premiums this next year. Not this year, because we had low yields of high protein wheat. Next year might be different. So keep your eye on the markets elsewhere, and then be ready with whatever concoction or you use. So we use the post-anthesis nitrogen spray, could go in as late as anthesis, or you could do some in-season splits to make nitrogen into protein.
So John, how are you using that
go
nitrogen
ahead,
late
Dale.
season?
Yep.
Sorry, that late season nitrogen, what's the form you're using to get it on?
Well, we've been using the North Dakota recipe using 28% UAN, but we also had a limited amount done where we dissolved urea, and it was actually got better response with the dissolved urea, but I just can't go to the dealer and buy that. We decided to stick with a commodity that's known, being UAN. But if people choose to brew up the other, it can work. We just didn't do enough work at it to become really confident.
So you're doing diluted with water then, right?
Yes. Yeah. Those are all diluted half with water, sprayed for 30 pounds of nitrogen. Do it either in the morning or in the evening, and 1 week after your fusarium spray. There's no secret to this. It's a well-known recipe. It's just that it isn't always warranted. It's rarely warranted unless premiums are high.
Right. And Lara, feel free to add your comments, because it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion. And as you mentioned, John, it is a decision you do make later in the season. So there is time to decide on it, but there's also time to hem and haw about it. Yes.
The best nitrogen dollar you spent is the nitrogen dollar to make yield. And so yield first, and then work on protein later if you think the yield potential is much higher, or that for some reason you shorted your initial application.
Yeah, sorry, Lara, you're right. It was 2 summers ago, because this summer was super dry. It was the summer before, when there was moisture to make a crop. Then it was much more exciting to go and add some nitrogen. And Pete, I know Pete is lurking around in the comments because he's making fun of me for having sheep. So Pete, if you want to weigh in on any of that for protein. Also, I will just note, usually we have to draw attention to how Ontario has it so much better than Western Canada. But this is one of those times, Sean, where Western Canada shines. We have beautiful wheat with amazing protein. And there you go.
Well, high protein wheat doesn't make good donuts, though,
That's true. And I like donuts. So there is that. But I also like durum. I like pasta, and I like bread. So there you go.
We had our challenges last year. We didn't have very good harvest weather, so we had a lot of sprouted wheat. So it was
yes.
Doesn't happen often, but hopefully we don't see it again. So.
Yeah. Okay. So John actually has a question about protein. Does protein get rained out? So he's noticed that with spring wheat, with each shot of rain, the protein goes down. What is the mechanism there?
Well, I don't know, but the protein doesn't go away.
No, it doesn't.
His falling number will get real bad, and that's usually the quality concern we're worried about. But no, protein doesn't go away.
Okay. I'm sure Peter will weigh in on this one, because I think we've had this discussion before about what does change after rain and what doesn't. Okay, and a question. Number. Yeah, falling number, right, because of sprouting, which you can't always see. It can be invisible. Okay, the price difference between 28% and dry urea is quite different. It's dry is $40 an acre cheaper. How does that factor into the total N equation? Dale, I'll start with you.
Well, we think about these things all the time. We look at our supply and situation. And so when I look at how farmers go to the field with systems, they've got trailers set up. If they're in a 28 business, they're in the 28 business. Mm-hmm. And to retool and change a practice to go to urea all of a sudden when you've been 10, 15 years UAN, I don't see those guys switching at this present time. But corn's also, you've had an opportunity to sell corn at $7 a bushel. So the margin growing corn is still there. It's actually as good as last year. So it's not what things cost, it's what's the margin left over, and it's as good as it's ever been, as long as corn stays up, of course. So there, no doubt there'll be some farmers want to make that switch. And but if you're all tooled up, and we've got farmers that got land all over, so they maybe hire us to custom spread urea and slow release nitrogen on the fields far away, pre-plant, get that out of the way. And as they get closer to home to their own storage tanks, they start to side dress in. So maybe we do half the end pre-plant, and then the home farm is all side dress. So we got all this way to buffer and reduce some of that cost. And it also depends if farmers hedge their cost by prepaying in the fall. So.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention we've already seen this take place this past fall. A lot of farmers that haven't applied ammonia in the past, farmers are reading the signals. And I've talked to several that switched and tooled up simply to put down ammonia later in the fall. Once supplies were back in shape and sitting pretty right now.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, we don't have long left, but I am going to get to clip 2. I imagine that confetti has just been thrown in the air for anyone following along who makes fun of me for not getting to the clips. But I do want to, because John, I've got a couple of your slides I want to refer to, but we're going to use the clip to get there. So Jay, we'll go to the canola clip. So this is specifically about canola, which we haven't talked a lot about, but planning for a dry year. We hope that that's not what we've got ahead, but of course for some areas of the prairies it is still looking incredibly dry. So let's head to this clip, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies for the year ahead.
Yeah, well, with some of the challenging issues last fall and people not getting their nitrogen on or applied in the fall as might have been their normal practices, we wanted to highlight some of their options on what they can do in crop or at seeding this year to I guess make up for that lack of application last year. So we've got a few different options here, whether it's applying all of the fertilizer at seeding, applying some at seeding, top dressing the remainder. So we have a few tips on what to do and what not to do.
So what sort of tips do you have?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe one important one is to expect the unexpected. So we did have a really dry spring here, and stand establishment was a little challenging. So we're not seeing a lot of the responses in the plots right now that they're not showing up, I guess, as much as they might have in another year. But that's the real life scenario, right? We don't always get the weather that we're hoping or that we're needing in terms of things. So whether it's looking at top dressing in season to make up for that the lack of nitrogen that went on at seeding or in the fall, for instance, we still need to remember we need that rainfall to get the nitrogen into the soil where it's actually going to do some good. Timing is another big one too. So what is the proper timing to get that product on, or when does the plant need it? So just recognizing that we do need the nitrogen in the soil by that 5-6 leaf stage, which is kind of the start of the period where it really starts to take up a lot of nitrogen each day.
So as far as what not to do goes, what's your number one tip on that?
Yeah, so we've got a couple good ones, and it seems like the what not to do plots are what really showed a result here. So we have one that's showcasing seed-placed nitrogen. So what we actually did was went in with a really high rate of ESN. So ESN being a somewhat safer product, we're still seeing that you can damage the seed by applying too much in the seed row. So nitrogen is that one product that if we can get it away from the seed, we'll be much better off. In terms of in-crop damage or things that are showing up, so again, applying UAN, so liquid nitrogen with flat fan spray nozzle, we see some really good leaf burning symptoms from that as well, versus the dribble band option, which is a little safer for the crop to handle.
So when is it too late to spray more nitrogen on?
So we do want to have that 5-6 leaf stage as kind of being the end of the window to do that. what we want to do is avoid having that crop starved for nitrogen at any point in its growing stage. But that is really the start of the peak uptake. So kind of as canola is bolting and in through flowering, that's when it's taking up the most pounds of nitrogen per day in its life cycle. So it needs to be available by then. So whether that means getting it all on at seeding, or if you do need to come in and do some top dressing, get it on before then, and hopefully, here's the wild card, that the rain will come and wash that into the soil so that it will be available when the plant is ready for it.
Field season. I can't wait. Maybe we'll have canola palooza type things again this year. Won't that be fun? I would attend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So we had to get some canola in there. I am actually a little surprised. I didn't realize it was so early in the season that it had such a high end demand.
Well, it does, and that's why when we talk about splits, it's not like Ontario where we have, that plant sitting there for 2 months not doing much or not using a lot. With our wheat and canola, they take up nitrogen fairly quickly. So your splits are only weeks apart between planting and when you want to have that on. So, but I don't know. There's two strategies for splits on canola or wheat. One is the Saskatchewan mentality, like it's dry and it might not rain again. So I'll start the crop with 60% of what it needs or a base rate. If it rains and there's yield potential, it'll get the rest of the groceries then. The other one, which a friend exploits here, is that when it's too wet or when you have losses, and they said, if that canola is going to drown out, I only want to lose 60% of my nitrogen, not all of it. But really the case is I want to, I'll put on the upfront, but if I get really wet and have losses, then I will come back and I will put on. And that's more the approach used in corn in Ontario. It's a way to protect your nitrogen until it's needed.
So, and that's of course, so let's talk in this last few minutes we have, let's talk some of those strategies. So certainly, so as you mentioned, John, for sure. And I want to share just quickly, I lived in Saskatchewan for a couple of years and I grew up in Manitoba. So to me, rain happened a lot for the most part, maybe too much. And when I moved to Saskatchewan, it had been quite rainy in June and I made a disparaging comment and I was immediately shushed because sometimes the rain goes away and it doesn't come back. Now, I was lucky to have lived there during relatively good years, but I didn't realize just how the drought mentality is like ingrained in, pun intended, in our Saskatchewan farmers. So we know obviously that split applications are one strategy that we can do, and there's some really great comments in the chat as well about the setup you have, right? So dry, liquid, hiring a custom operator, how quickly can you put a strategy together to potentially do that? But John, I want to bring up the one slide, Jay, that shows it's the map of Manitoba, Minnesota, that sort of stuff that shows the residual N. Because obviously you've still got to make a decision, John, right? At seeding time or just ahead or just after about what you're putting in the ground for these wheat and canola areas. So walk us through what we're looking at here. Quick question, when was this done?
Okay. Yeah. Dale spoke that the spring nitrate soil test doesn't work very well in Ontario, not used by many, but the fall nitrate soil test is used extensively in Western Canada, in the Northern Great Plains. And so these are the average values in different areas taken after the 2021 wheat crop. And so this is basically what we had in the fall. We'll have 5 months of frozen soil, and then we'll be planting next spring. So this is usually a pretty good indication of what we will have to start that crop next spring. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but normally those values be somewhere between 25 to 40 pounds of residual N. And so we're 2 to 3 times that. And it generally is reflective of where you had the drought. You had little nitrogen use, not much removal, and certainly no losses because of excess water. So that nitrogen is money in the bank right now. And many farmers are routinely soil testing. A lot more did this year. So we're hoping they exploit it. And we consider that pound for pound equivalent to fertilizer nitrogen. So if you
Okay.
have a fertilizer recommendation, this comes right off the top.
Okay.
So
So right. So we're looking at southern Manitoba, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. So in those areas, you would take that. So you're in either the 84 or the 75. I don't know where that is. That Highway 2 or is that Highway 1 that it's cut
oh,
off there?
let's say we're 75. It's postal zone.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but let's say your usual rate is about 125. Um, and you've got to say you would take it straight off or pretty
Yeah,
close?
yes, but that's where, as Dale said earlier, all those other factors come into place as far
Right.
as uh, your experience. And most people in the past, when they've had high carryover nitrogen, we always start the crop with some nitrogen. We're not going to go with zero. We're going to start with 30, 40, 50 pounds anyways. That's where I suggest, I don't know if Peter's going to yak on this too, that an enriched strip is not a bad idea in some of these fields. If you're going with a low rate, just put a strip in there with a higher rate. If you can see that, then you know you might need more than your base rate. But this is in the top 2 feet, and generally our even cereals and canola will root 4 feet routinely. So they're quite likely to catch this.
Right. So now, Peter did ask, and I wanted to follow. I did want to know when this was taken because, of course, we have heard because, especially to the southern areas of Manitoba and to the east, there was some fall moisture and there was regrowth. So there was some
Yeah, I know.
strange regrowth and there was some weed growth that maybe wasn't controlled. So if a
Those
farmer's
weeds are called cover crops.
right,
Yeah.
right, but what we
and
know,
and, and oh no, I'm
they
going to say
are
some disparaging things about cover crops, and then
okay. Do it.
Dale's going to follow up with some good news. But out
Okay.
here, cover crops in a dry environment is just sucking water
Yes.
away that you really want to bank in the soil. The same
Mhm.
way you want to bank nitrogen in the soil. Our nitrogen now, and we've measured amounts between 80 to 160 pounds in the regrowth, that's not a sure thing to be released next year. In
Right.
fact, studies with cover crops here and in North Dakota show that it's a miser at providing that nitrogen to next year's crop. There can be yield drag, and we may even need more nitrogen. So my hope would have been, in an ideal world, we'd have controlled a bunch of that uncontrolled growth earlier last fall, and before it used a lot of water, and before it took up a lot of nitrogen. Now let's
Mhm.
flip over. We'll go to Ontario where it was wet, and there Dale could tell where cover crops are a great thing because of what they hold and catch.
Yeah. Yeah. So, bare soil going in the winter in Ontario is not a great thing. We want to reduce that brown gap, we call it, and
Mhm.
keeping soil in place, reducing nutrient runoff. All those are good things, and we're always debating what the nitrogen credit is on an appropriate cover crop the following year, and it's been highly variable. But I
Mhm.
think the one thing we don't talk about, and it's becoming painfully obvious, is they're great at controlling weeds.
Yes.
Mm.
You want to suppress fleabane and water hemp, grow a good cover crop. It does wonders for reducing the seed weed bank and smothering those weeds. And I think that's something we don't talk nearly enough about with a good cover crop. And I think going forward with glyphosate challenges and glufosinate challenges, that we need all the help we can get. And we don't focus enough on reducing the seed weed bank. So I think it's all part and parcel, that whole approach to weed management as well as soil health.
Mhm. Now, I will just send a shout out to my ruminant friends who can, munch that up and deposit it back in a partially available form. Just so you know, John, we can do
Well,
that.
I'll give you that, and I'll also change my tune pretty quick when we're in a non-moisture limiting environment. When we
Yes,
get wet,
absolutely.
things like
Yep,
that, absolutely, they
yep.
can be your friend. But under a dry or a drought environment, uh, it's not helping much, but it still costs a lot of money to plant that cover crop seed.
Yeah, Absolutely. Yep. And it's fuel and it's time and it's all those things, right? So it's not a slam dunk for sure. Now, a couple good comments though coming in. Michael says, Ag Canada Scott Research Farm has done studies with split apps at seeding time. And if you don't get the rain, there's actually a yield drag doing split. So is that because the crop is shorted too early on when it's setting up yield?
Well, I'm not
Potentially?
aware of the work from Scott, but I do know the work from that Guy Lafon did at Indian Head. And yes, in years when the soil is well charged with water, there's no advantage to splitting. The nitrogen should go on at seeding, so it's in the soil and not stranded. When you hold it back, and if you do get 2-3 weeks without moisture, your nitrogen not only is a potential of being lost to volatilization, but simply stranded at the surface. So I'm with you, Michael. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Yeah.
Dale, there was some significant soybean. Well, we had hail events, so we had edible beans, we had soybeans, we had a whole bunch of shelling out and regrowth that happened this fall. Any chance there might be an end credit from some of those that grew this fall? It was like a carpet in some areas.
No, I wouldn't count on it. Wasn't that much biomass. It looked green. It looked awesome, but really, if it's 500 pounds of dry matter per acre, I would be shocked.
Right.
So
And so now, but to the other side, it wouldn't have taken up anything, right? I mean, they were pretty young plants. They're going to cycle back through pretty quickly.
Well, there's a very low carbon nitrogen ratio, so there's nothing going to get tied up. So
Right.
it's just fresh
so-
fresh green manure, I guess. So
That's exactly what it is. And weed suppression, as you said. Let's think
if it's
positive
enough,
thoughts. Yeah, about yeah. So, but this is one of the things that has come up a little bit in the comments is talking about and tie up. So there's a few different things we've mentioned, and John, you've mentioned stranded. So nitrogen that's stranded is nitrogen that the plant it's not in proximity to where the plant can get it, right? Is what you mean by that?
Yes, but this is the opportunity for me to beat my drum about the gold standard, which is banding nitrogen, because I just spoke to some canola growers last week, and they're all into broadcasting their nitrogen in Ontario there, and just say, you want nitrogen efficiency, first thing you do is you band your nitrogen, put it in a tight band, and then it delays nitrification, so it delays losses. But most importantly, it places it below the surface, no stranding, and it keeps it separate from the crop residue, so less is immobilized. And a lot of the nitrogen we put on our soil is immobilized. It isn't lost, but for crops that need it right away, like wheat and canola, it can delay the uptake. So out here, banding is still king.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Yeah, there you go. Now, Dale, but that is one of the things that you were referring to, of course, with high residue. You have to recognize that in a high residue, so corn on corn or something like that, you may actually increase your nitrogen rates, not because the N is lost, but because it's tied up in that residue until it gets cycled back through.
Yeah, that's the residue penalty. So I see Peter Johnson telling me that there's some 25 bushel losses. Okay, none of that occurred in my area. So yes, so that is a significant contribution of nitrogen in that case. So yes, there is a probably, even we take 40%, there's probably 125 pounds of N back in there. So yes, so I wasn't, so good point, Peter. I wasn't really, I didn't have any of that firsthand experience, but yeah, that was an isolated path of hail through there. And if you're one of those farmers under the hail cloud, it is significant for sure.
Yeah, it was bad. I mean, the photos were bad, but then the like all the germinated seed and everything was quite bizarre to see after. It was very strange. Okay, we are running out of time here, gents. I'll give you a chance. So strategy for this year, John. I mean, you've got some snow. Oh, go ahead.
I want you to go to one of my slides. Just I need to advertise our nitrogen rate calculator, just the one that has it on the bottom, okay?
I love that. We are all about such things.
Advertising. I didn't buy it tonight. No, not that one.
No, not that one. Although we could talk about that one if you really wanted to.
No, let's
We're
keep
getting
going.
there. Keep going.
Let's get one more. Look at the very bottom of that. If you're in Western Canada, yes, and you want to give a test drive, what we like about these calculators is that they may not be based on your response curves, but you can factor in there the value of the crop and the price of the fertilizer, and it will show you how small the changes are as the prices or whatever change. And so it'll give you those what if scenarios. So I just encourage people to take those for a test drive if they're growing wheat, barley, or canola in the West.
All right. I like it. Now, Dale,
Mhm.
I was just going to say, John, you need to update the colors. I don't like the green and the yellow. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Okay. Now, Dale, sort of similar idea in the work that you did with the example that you had here and working through those economical rates of nitrogen. Is that a recommendation of something you'd like to see, like encourage more agronomists or farmers to do? I mean, is this, and then I guess to add to that is, we know obviously where we start to, every dollar we spend doesn't make us a dollar anymore, but is it sort of every farm decides, okay, a dollar that makes me $1.20 is worth it, but a dollar that only makes me $1.05 isn't? Where is that ROI cutoff?
Well, and you want to be at that point, I think, generally where the last dollar spent comes back to you. And there's some farmers aren't comfortable with that because it's very easy to miss that. So I always said that, if you're plus or minus $20 on your profit, you're pretty safe that you're not going to spend that last dollar and get 90 cents back. So, and all in the eye beholder, but you need data to do that. And so I always encourage farmers to do as much on-farm trial work as they can, especially nitrogen rate trial work. And there's lots of reasons for that. And we got lots of technology on farm to do strips now and harvest it and capture the data. So there's all kinds of, the technology change on farm is huge. And so this stuff can easily be done if they're inclined to do it. Certainly lots of people can help them interpret the data. Got lots of people like myself out in the industry can grab that data and make some sense out of it. And so I just think that with the technology, there really isn't a lot of reason not to do it. And so I just think that it's worthwhile. And as we look at more sustainability programs coming, we're getting participation in some of the sustainability programs where they're asking, well, what's your end rate? How many liters of diesel fuel to use, et cetera, et cetera. And they're calculating your carbon footprint. We're nowhere near getting paid for that yet, but it's likely going to come at some point. So knowing that you're getting challenged on a practice, so if I cut nitrogen back 20 pounds and I'm going to get $40 credit for doing that, does that make economic sense? The only way you're going to know that was with your own data. So that's why I encourage to get ready down the road what might come. So and I have no inside knowledge, and I have no idea when and if it'll come, but it's certainly climate change is being talked about and researched a lot. So.
Absolutely. Now, quickly, Jim Hale did join late. Jim, the calculator, I will link to it in the post. So for everyone who's watching this, whatever platform you're on, we post the video. It does live on YouTube, but we actually post it on realagriculture.com/agronomists. Every episode gets its own post, and we link to the clips, and we link to any pertinent information, research papers, those sorts of things. So if ever you want to see something that you missed or anything like that, I can link to it in that post. So John, I will make sure to include that link so that people can find that calculator. And yes, John, the question about what is behind you, my guess, I think I know, these are the official soils of different provinces and states. And now I can't, on the screen, I can't see Manitoba's, but I'm pretty sure it's a New Dale. Oh, where? Okay,
yeah,
it
is.
Look at that.
I got North Carolina. It's a Cecil soil.
Wow.
Anyways.
A Cecil. What is a Cecil soil like?
Well, it's an old rusted out soil. It looks like Dale's shirt. There you
go. Now we can see a New Dale and an Oxford.
That's why we have such great soils here. They're not rusted out like those things in the south and the east.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. St. Rosalie, that's Quebec's.
Yes. It's a heavy clay.
Yeah, that's what would be my guess.
So to answer Peter's concern about delta yield there, so if a farmer's doing an N rate trial, if you're so inclined, put a 0 N rate in and then do that's half your normal rate and half again of your normal rate. So you have at least 4 curves. If you don't want to do 0, do 50.
Yeah.
and be able to get enough of a difference in rates to understand what your end response is. That's really what delta yield is. It's what is my end response on a field.
Okay.
And my experience has been that delta yield, if you're consistent in your management and your crop rotation, your delta yield on a field is reasonably consistent year over year. So
Okay.
that's been my experience. So.
Okay.
I'd go a little bit further. I would consider that delta yield to be your measure of soil health. What's your nutrient supplying power of the soil? Because we've got a lot of farms, like
Yeah.
Dale mentioned, we can have very high yield potential, and that's generally, I consider a healthy soil because it's got, good rotation in the past, good organic matter, and it's the organic matter that's pumping out that nitrogen.
Well, when we calibrate our pre-side dress nitrogen soil test in the late 80s, early 90s, we found in Chatham, Kent, where the main county for corn production, we found that 20% of the fields at that time, or 20% of the sites at that time, did not respond to nitrogen. We got maximum yield of corn with zero nitrogen, as we did with 200 pounds of N. So there are some fields out there that have the capabilities to support a lot of yield, and we don't talk about that much anymore. It's kind of gotten lost in the conversation. So it is a possibility, but zero N applied does not equal zero yield. It just does not.
That's right.
So,
Yeah. But that is roughly your correlation of your delta yield is. Yeah. So if you're not comfortable going zero, go low enough that you can separate out 3 or 4 different end levels.
And it's equally important to go really super high so that you get a plateau. Like, go to 270.
I only ask farmers not to do a strip, just drop a cell or a stamp of zero or low nitrogen in the field. Yeah. If you can't find it, then you know that your field is putting out a lot of nitrogen.
There you go. That's a great.
It's really hard to find the zero N strip in a rolling because the low ground is where all the nitrogen is. That's where all the yield is. That's where the water and nitrogen is. So seldom do you see the end response there. But everybody looking at a yield map wants to put more N on with a quarter and 300 bushel the acre, and that's really the opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah, but it's because we've moved it from the top into that depression, and so it's all the topsoil that's there. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, I love it. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Dale Cowan, John Heard, thank you both for sharing your time and your expertise on this Valentine's Day. I really do appreciate it. And to everyone in the comments, thank you to all your questions, all your comments. And of course, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomist for CEU credits. And thank you to our show sponsors, Adama Canada, Real Ag Radio, and Mind Your Farm Business podcast. We are taking a break next week because it is Family Day next Monday. So we're not going to have an agronomist episode. However, on the week after, February 28th, you are not going to want to miss this. We are going to be talking about what is your plan B, plan C, maybe plan, I don't know, all the way down to G for herbicides specifically, but potentially other inputs if we are facing some significant supply disruptions. So we'll focus on herbicides, but we'll talk about a few other things as well. So come on back, February 28th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Alrighty. Cheers, everybody.